200 years ago, Isa heard the morning birds singing sutras to this suffering world. I heard them too this morning, which must mean, since we will always have a suffering world, we must also always have a song.
Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 471. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the literary executor of the internationally acclaimed and celebrated author David Budbill, Nadine Budbill.
Nadine. Hi, thanks so much for having me, Barney. It's great to be here.
And so we're here to talk a little bit about your father. Your father has written several books. Mm-hmm. And we're talking a little bit about the book that was just, released recently. Well, back in April, it was released through Rootstock Publishing, called Judevine, a love song for a place and its people.
Mm-hmm.
Collected poems.
Here it is, this beautiful book. Yeah.
Look at that, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to know about the sort of backstory of Judevine, or what would you like to know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Judevine. Yeah.
Sure. So my father moved to Vermont in 1969, and he got a job working on a Christmas tree farm. And he felt very inspired by and connected with his coworkers and his new neighbors in rural Vermont. So this was in Wolcott, in the Northeast Kingdom, in large part due to his own working class upbringing and childhood in Cleveland, Ohio. Very different place and context, but working class family. And he started just carrying a little notebook in his pocket when he was working on the Christmas tree farm and jotting down notes and little bits of inspirations from his days and from the people he was working with, and started turning those into poems. And then also just the life there in Wolcott and the community around him, and started slowly building all these poems about this place and the people in this place. And they were first published in several very small little volumes, 4 different small volumes. And then eventually in the 80s, those all came together into the very first edition of Judevine, the collected poems, which was first published by Chelsea Green Press. And then there was the second edition some time later. And then we felt like it was time to do a new and revised edition here in 2025. So we worked to do some editing, kind of making the book accessible to a wider audience, and really kind of, it's a really long book, 250 pages. So it's not a small poetry volume. So we wanted to cut it down in the ways that we could, and really just capture the nuggets of beauty and goodness in it. And so for this new edition, we came up with the subtitle, A Love Song for a Place and Its People, because that is really, at the end of the day, what it is a love song. My dad loved the place and the people and the stories, and the characters and all of that. And also really always had a strong sense of rooting for the underdog. His father used to always say to him, so my grandfather used to always say, "Stick up for the little guy, bud." And that became a real compass point for my father. And so telling the shining a light on the lives of folks who are, so overlooked and unseen by the powers that be, who had so much ingenuity and creativity and beauty, and also, of course, were struggling with rural poverty and all of that. So.
Right. And as we mentioned too, is that, so you are the literary executor of your father's work. And so what else does that job entail beyond editing and publishing?
Hmm. Responding to inquiries, permission requests to use the work. I mean, I get probably one email a week, at least, from someone who wants to compose a piece of music out of my father's poetry or do a production of a play. My father was also a playwright in addition to a poet. Um, or wants to purchase a CD or wants to. I'm part of the Vermont Humanities Speakers Bureau, so I have a talk about Judevine that's part of the Speakers Bureau. So any Vermont nonprofit can book me to come and do this talk, which includes reading of poems from the book, but also weaving that with narrative about my father and his writing process and all of that. So just that sort of thing, and the various projects that come up. We're sort of thinking about what are we going to do next year for the 10-year anniversary of his death, and we have a memorial reading planned with Backroads Poetry Series that'll be in the summer. I'll be at Farmers Night at the State House in April. With some actors doing Judevine. So just kind of responding to all the different interests and inquiries that there are related to the work.
Well, then you kind of hinted at it already, but like, how do you balance honoring your father's voice with making his work accessible to new generations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and for the most part, I lean towards honoring his voice, and maintaining the truth of his writing. But there are some things like language changes just to make things more current and accessible. But it's minimal. Like what I'm willing to change is I don't change a lot. I feel like I have, particularly with Judevine, because it was such a long piece, I wanted to do like edit out what felt like it wasn't absolutely essential. And I feel like I have my dad's permission, like, to do that kind of work.
Right. And so then what surprises you about new readers' responses to his work?
It's a great question. I think the timelessness of it. These poems were written, particularly in Judevine, were written in the 70s. And that they're timeless and that they're relevant, particularly, in light of like ongoing social and economic struggle and injustice, and poverty and overlooked rural people. So there's a real timelessness and particularly people who grew up in Vermont, or any rural community. This book is not just, even though it's based in a place and is place based in that way, it speaks to people all over the place. So I think the timelessness, the simplicity. My dad has, so a lot of his later poetry, which he wrote under the pseudonym Judevine Mountain, he was very inspired by the ancient Chinese poets, and his writing became very short, and simple, whereas the Judevine poems are more sort of prose-like and long and narrative. But all of it is plain language. There is no pretense. There is no obscuring what is trying to be said. It's very direct and clear, and that's what he wanted to do. He didn't want to confuse people with his writing. He wanted it to be accessible.
Well, then, as a literary executor, how do you manage your emotional connection while making objective decisions about his work?
I don't think that I do. Like it's all mixed together, and that's okay. I don't feel like,
Right.
it is. It is a labor of love. It is emotional. I adore my father. He was an incredible father to me. It's a huge, huge loss to lose him. But it's like I bring that, like that adoration and heart and love to managing his literary estate. So Yeah. It's never
Right.
felt like a conflict or anything, where it's like, oh, I need to get this in check or something. It's it's all love. It's all love.
Right. And then, so what advice would you give to children of writers preserving a legacy then?
I think it's like the biggest thing is letting it be enough.
Mm,
It's easy to feel like I should be doing more and I want more to be happening. And, the reality is, I don't get paid for this job. I mean, like the bits and pieces come in for different gigs or royalties, but it's very small.
right.
As the checks that I get from Copper Canyon Press, who's his poetry publisher, not Judevine was published by Rootstock Publishing here in Montpelier, but his other poetry books are with Copper Canyon Press. And when you get the royalty check from them, on it, it says, there's no money in poetry, but there's no poetry in money either. So they're very small. So anyway, yeah, that just, I guess, so I guess what I'm saying is that I have a job, I have a family, this is on the side, and so there's so much more that could be done to promote his work and his legacy, but I have to just be okay with what I can do. And also my mother is still living and helps a lot. And we also have a group of folks that we call the David Budbill Brain Trust who help with different projects. We just convened last night, actually. So they are very helpful in ideation and execution of ideas. But I can get hard on myself because I love my dad so much and his work that I wanted to be big. But the fact that there's a lot happening and we're almost 10 years out from his death in itself is remarkable, I think.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Oh, are there any themes in David's work that resonate now more than when he wrote them?
I feel like it's timeless. I mean, in Judevine, the themes of, like I said, rural poverty, social and economic struggle, people being overlooked by the powers that be, all very relevant. A lot of his later poetry really leaned into like the simplicity of life and nature and a cup of tea in the afternoon and the garden. It's very like sort of became very much nature based and sort of like in the vein of ancient Chinese poetry in a very like sort of simple way of life. So, and then, but also like, is very committed to issues of race and class in particular, and a very political. For a long time, he had an email that he sent out called the Judevine Emailite and would write political essays in there. So certainly like some of his work is very relevant in terms of the current moment,
Right.
for sure.
Well, so if your father could see his legacy today, what do you think he would say?
I think he'd be very pleased. Yeah, I think he would. He's got a poem is something like, my life will I'm like the clouds in the sky, like my life will leave no trace. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. There are so many people who love his work and are huge fans, and all these things happening, like I said, 10 years later. So I think he would be very, very pleased and grateful for all of the people who have stewarded this legacy. And there have been so many people. Judevine became a play. It was produced 65 times in 34 different states. And our like biggest love productions being in Montpelier at Lost Nation Theater. And so I'm just thinking of like all the people who have produced the play and read the work, and so many people. It takes a village.
Right. Um, uh, is there any? I'm kind of curious about this too, Nadine. Is there any like one poem or piece of his that you feel more connected to than the others? No.
I have my favorites. I certainly have my
Right.
favorites. There's no one piece that I feel more connected to, but yeah, there's certain poems that I just adore.
Yeah. Is there one of his poems that you wanted to read to us?
Sure. Maybe I'll read. This is from Moment to Moment, Poems of a Mountain Recluse. It's the last poem in the book. It's a short one, and it's called What Isa Heard. 200 years ago, Isa heard the morning birds singing sutras to this suffering world. I heard them too this morning, which must mean, since we will always have a suffering world, we must also always have a song. So I just love that one.
Wow. Yeah.
And that we have those words are written on his gravestone, like, which doesn't, if his gravestone gives you the wrong picture, it's sort of like a natural rock. But since we will always have a suffering world, we must also always have a song, is what's written on his gravestone. Because he one of his biggest strengths, I think, was holding the complexity, the duality of life, of being very in tune with the suffering of the world and the suffering of the people. But also he loved music. He played music. He collaborated with musicians a lot. And like the importance of art and music, and joy and simple pleasures, holding both, being able to hold both at the same time.
And you mentioned earlier too that Vermont seems to be central to his identity and his writing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel as though his work is for fellow Vermonters, or is it for people that love Vermont, or people that if people have ever been here would understand his work?
Certainly, I think he's got fans all over the world. I get emails and correspondence from people all over the world and all over the country, certainly. And of course, people in Vermont love it extra. But I think especially, Judevine is so place-based. But again, there's a production happening in Oklahoma in the spring. So it's been produced in San Francisco, and it's been all over the place. So there's something about it that transcends the geography.
And so then I guess what's next for David Budbill's work? Is there new editions, translations, or adaptions?
Great question. I think we're in a kind of a wait and see moment, after getting this new edition of Judevine out, which, by the way, I wanted to mention has one of the new things about this book are new introductions. There's an introduction by Billy Collins, former U.S. Poet Laureate Billy Collins, by William Parker, who's a world-renowned avant-garde jazz musician who my dad collaborated with a lot, and then one by Kim Bent, who's the founding artistic director of Lost Nation Theater in Montpelier. But anyway, so getting that new edition out was a lot of work. And so now I'm kind of coasting, doing speakers bureau talks. So I think it's a wait and see. We talked last night in our brain trust meeting about maybe trying to get, there was an opera created from Judevine. It's called A Fleeting Animal. The libretto was written by my father, and the music was written by Eric Nielsen, who's a composer here in Vermont. It was phenomenal. It had two runs, I think like 10 years apart. Really powerful opera. So we were talking about maybe bringing back the opera, because now it's been 10 years since it was done. That's just a matter of money, like being able to fundraise the money to be able to pull off something like that, a big production. So we'll see. Sort of waiting to see what comes.
Is there going to be an updated version of the Bones on Black Spruce Mountain at all?
Yeah. I'm hoping so. That I would love to bring that back into print because it's out of print.
Right.
So that's one of the books for young people. That I run into teachers and people who say, "Oh my gosh, I read that book in 5th grade and it changed my life." And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm hoping to get that back into print, and maybe that's something we'll do with Rootstock Publishing here one of these days. And there's always been a lot of interest in making Bones on Black Spruce Mountain into a movie. Hasn't happened yet, but I've got a lot of interest over the years, and that no one's been able to pull it off. But maybe someday that will happen, because that would be great.
Well, it wasn't that like a sequel to Snowshoe Trick and to Otter River? Wasn't it connected to that at all?
Yeah, other way around. Like, so Bones on Black Spruce Mountain came first, and then Snowshoe Trick to Otter River.
Okay, that's what it was.
It's more stories about the same boys.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, because I remember Bones on Black Spruce Mountain. I was 10 when that book came out. So
yeah.
Yeah,
it's classic.
Yeah. So if someone wanted to start exploring your father's work, which book or poem do you recommend first?
Gosh. I might say The Happy Life. That's what I just picked up. Happy Life. All of these are wonderful books, but they're so accessible because the poems are so short. All of these Copper Canyon Press books, the poems are very short and accessible. But that's a great place. And a lot of people, over and over again, I hear, like, I don't like poetry, but I love your father's work, because it is accessible. There's like some reviewer said, I think from the LA Times or something, said that David Budbill's work is as plain as a pair of Levi's and as accessible as a parking lot. Which to my dad, like, being called plain and accessible was like the ultimate compliment. That's what he wanted. He didn't want to write kind of the complicated poetry where you're not quite sure what it means.
So, Nadine, if people want to learn more about your father's work, where's the best place they could go to?
The website, which is davidbudbill.com, is a great place to go. We also have a Facebook page, which you can find by searching, and post there about once a week poems and updates and whatnot. So that's also a good way.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll see that on the website. There is a version of the poem I read that is sung by Eric Nielsen, the composer I was mentioning. And so many people have created musical pieces out of the poems because they lend themselves to that.
Nadine, listen, you're going to have to come back on once you get more of your dad's books, back out again. This has been a great conversation.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're welcome.